Hi, this is Dr. Gregory Sadler. I'm a professor of philosophy and the president and founder of an educational consulting company called Reason.io, where we put philosophy into practice. I've studied and taught philosophy for over 20 years, and I find that many people run into difficulties reading classic philosophical texts. Sometimes it's the way things are said or how the text is structured. But the concepts themselves are not always that complicated, and that's where I come in. To help students and lifelong learners, I've been producing longer lecture videos and posting them to YouTube. Many viewers say they find them useful. What you're currently watching is part of a new series of shorter videos, each of them focused on one core concept from an important philosophical text. I hope you find it useful as well. In part 3 of his work, Ressentiment, Max Scheler is going to tell us there are two fundamentally different ways for the strong to bend down to the weak, for the rich to help the poor, for the more perfect life to help, and he puts this in quotes, the less perfect. And he's going to sketch out for us what one of these is at great length in a way that will, in his view, allow genuine Christian morality to avoid the charge of being aimed at, driven by, originating in ressentiment, as Nietzsche has developed that concept. And so how would this actually work? Well, it's tied in with Scheler's conception of what he calls life and vital values. So life is something more than just pleasure and pain or usefulness and harmfulness. It's more than just a drive or desire to preserve itself, to reproduce itself. Instead, life can be more. It's not yet at the level that he will say is the holy or spiritual values, but it is a set of values of its own that's irreducible to lower values. So he is going to talk about this action of bending down being motivated by a powerful feeling of security, strength, and inner salvation, of the invincible fullness of one's own life and existence. And he tells us that this unites into a clear awareness, now not necessarily one that is expressed or conceptualized, but an awareness on the part of the one who is extending the help to the one who's worse off. An awareness of what? That one is rich enough. Now, he doesn't mean rich just in monetary terms. He means one has the resources, one has the capacities, the capabilities to share one's being and one's possessions. So, not just to share one's possessions, but to share one's very existence, one's being, the things that makes a person what they are. And he goes on and says, love, sacrifice, help, the descent of the small and the weak, spring from a spontaneous overflow, and I really like that term. So two terms there, spontaneous, not being coerced, not perhaps even being planned out, and an overflow, an abundance, a surplus of what? Of force, accompanied by bliss and deep inner calm. And then he says, if we compare this natural readiness for love and sacrifice, any sort of specific egoism, the concern for oneself and one's interest, even the instinct of self-preservation, are actually not signs of life itself or a healthy life. They're a sign of something that has been, as he says, blocked, something missing, something reduced to less than what life is possible, a blocked and weakened life. Why is this the case? Well, he tells us, and this is a different view on life, that life is essentially expansion. Life is development. Life is growth, right? Growth in what? In plentitude, not self-preservation. So does this mean that you wouldn't preserve your life at all? No, but we don't want to reduce life down to merely self-preservation. And Scheler is not the first person to say stuff like this. There's all sorts of other philosophers before him, but he is really stressing this. So he goes on and he's going to now talk about why we would sacrifice life, why we would sacrifice vitality. So we can sacrifice life in favor of values that we grasp, we perceive to be higher than life. So there would be cases where a person might sacrifice themselves for the good of, their country, or to preserve some spiritual good, to, preserve something that is holy, even just to advance that, right? He says, we believe that life can be sacrificed for values higher than life. But now here's where Scheler is making an interesting contribution. This does not mean that all sacrifice runs counter to life and its advancement. It might be possible to sacrifice life for the very purpose or respecting the very value of life, life's own value and its advancement, as he's going to say. So he calls this a form of sacrifice which is a free renunciation of one's own vital abundance, a beautiful and natural overflow of one's forces. Now, why would we do this? Why would somebody sacrifice that? There's more than just, life itself. This is not a dynamic that is flowing out of the very essence of life. There's an additional component. We have to care about somebody else. He says that every living being has a natural instinct of sympathy for other living beings, which increases with their proximity and similarity to himself. So we would sacrifice ourselves for beings with whom we feel united and solidary in contrast to everything dead. And he says that this is not just coming from egoic, that is selfish, urges. This is a sacrificial impulse that he says is an original component of life and precedes all of those particular aims and goals which calculation, intelligence, and reflection impose on later. So he calls this an urge to sacrifice, and he says, this is a beautiful statement, we have an urge to sacrifice before we ever know why, for what, and for whom. So this is something that is integral, not just to human nature, but to living nature. We can observe this in other animals as well, but perhaps it takes on a greater scope for human beings. And he goes on and he brings up Jesus, because we are talking about Christian morality. So he says that Jesus' view of nature and life shows clearly that he understood this fact, and he gives the example of when he tells us not to worry about eating and drinking, it's not because he doesn't care about life. He's not indifferent to life and its preservation. He's just saying that that is not the be-all and end-all. And he sees also a vital weakness in worrying about the next day. So life that is robust, life that is strong, life that is rich, both in terms of what we can see in front of us and we could say ontologically, is going to flow outward to others and not worry so much just about preserving itself, let alone hoarding things for itself. And he goes on and he says that all voluntary concentration on one's own bodily well-being, all worry and anxiety, what does it actually do? It hampers rather than furthers the creative force which instinctively and beneficently governs all life. Now, does this mean that we're putting life aside and saying, oh, it doesn't matter? No. He says that this is a profound and secret confidence in life's own vigor. Vigor being liveliness, right? So life's own capacity for life. One has a confidence in this and of inner security from the mechanical accidents which may befall it. He talks about a gay, light, bold, knightly indifference to external circumstances drawn from the depth of life itself, something that is a possibility for us human beings. He says the periods of greatest vitality were indifferent to life and to its end, and this indifference is a state of mind which has vital value. So, interestingly, if you've got enough life, then you worry less about life. It's the people who are declining who worry more about preserving what they've got. And then he talks about let's call it an enhancement of this, an additional awareness, right? In addition to this vital security, there's this other feeling of bliss and security, awareness of safety in the fortress of ultimate being itself. And this is what he says that Jesus is calling the kingdom of God. This condition, solidarity, community that one can trust in and thereby orient one's own life. Now, we're not going to worry too much about that at this point. We're more interested in the way in which we use life. And so he goes on and he tells us that when a person's spontaneous impulse of love and sacrifice finds a specific goal, an opportunity for applying itself, the person doesn't welcome it as a chance to plunge into such phenomena as poverty, sickness, or ugliness. That doesn't mean that he stays away from those, though, right? He doesn't help this struggling life because of those negative values, but despite them. He helps in order to develop whatever may still be sound and positive. He doesn't love such life because it is small, poor, small, and ugly, and he doesn't passively dwell on these attributes. What does he orient himself to then instead of what he actually sees in front of him? And he's going to use the example of the leper, for example, who is not going to get better, right? But still needs comfort, needs love, needs sacrifice made on the part of the one who has the capacity to do that. In this case, St. Francis, right? So he goes on and he says, the positive vital values are independent of these defects and lie much deeper. Therefore, his own fullness of life can and should overcome his natural reaction of fearing and fleeing them, and his love should helpfully develop whatever is positive in the poor or sick man. He does not love sickness or poverty, but what is behind them, the vitality that is behind them. And his help is directed against these evils of sickness and poverty. So he gives the example of St. Francis of Assisi, kissing festering wounds and not even killing the bugs that bite him, but leaving his body to them. These acts could be seen as signs of perverted instincts and a perverted valuation. That's the way some people have, actually. Oh, this is morbid, right? And he says, but that's not the case. It's not a lack of nausea or a delight in the pus that makes St. Francis act this way. He overcomes his nausea through a deeper feeling of life and vigor. I have enough I can give to you. Not, ooh, you are, scaring me and gross. I need to stay away from you. It's an embracing on the part of the person who is strong to be able to do that. So he says that this is completely different from the recent modern realism in art and literature, the exposure of social misery, the description of little people wallowing in the morbid, which is a typical ressentiment phenomenon. And, we can think about the ways in which these are understood in our own time, more than 100 years after Scheler has written this. Is there, something similar to what he is describing here as a possibility for life, love, and sacrifice? Is there also something within society coming from many different angles, we could say, many different perspectives, that stresses instead the ressentiment attitude? So, Scheler is trying to demonstrate here that when we are sacrificing and, using our strength, using our richness, using our perfection, whatever degree we may have of it, to benefit those who are worse off, it is quite possible for us to be doing that, not only without ressentiment, but doing so in a way that is healthy and normative and calls to be imitated and reproduced.